"I'll marry the first woman who walks through that door," said Connor Whitmore, his voice loud and slurred from too much scotch. "You can't be serious," Claire Whitmore hissed, grabbing her brother's arm as he swayed slightly in the grand hall of their family estate. He pulled away from her grip, his tie crooked, the sleeves of his designer suit creased from hours of grieving and accepting condolences. "I'm dead serious," Connor said, raising his half-empty glass like a toast to fate. "Granddad always said love comes when you stop looking for it. Well, I've stopped. I've had enough of women chasing a wallet instead of a heart." The funeral reception for Malcolm Whitmore had been going on for hours. Guests dressed in black still lingered under the ornate chandeliers of the Whitmore estate, sipping from crystal glasses, whispering behind gloved hands. Malcolm wasn't just a grandfather to Connor. He'd been a father figure ever since their parents died in a plane crash 16 years ago. "Connor, please," Claire whispered again. "You're hurting. Don't say something you'll regret." But Connor wasn't listening. He turned to the crowd, composed of business associates, distant relatives, socialites, and old family friends. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called out, his voice rising and echoing off the high ceilings. "My grandfather believed in love, in fate, in finding someone real, not just someone interested in bank accounts and last names. He spent his final years telling me that I needed to open my heart." Tyler Hayes, Connor's best friend and longtime business partner, stepped forward cautiously. "Maybe this isn't the best time, man." Connor waved him off. "No, I'm done pretending. I'm done with empty smiles and fake relationships." He lifted his glass high. "So here it is. I'll marry the first woman who walks through that door, no questions asked, no background checks, no prenups. Let fate decide." Gasps echoed through the room. Claire looked horrified. Tyler rubbed his temples. Murmurs spread quickly. Was this a drunken outburst or a serious vow from one of the wealthiest men in Manhattan? Connor Whitmore scolded Mrs. Evelyn Langston, one of Malcolm's closest friends. "This isn't how you honor your grandfather, isn't it?" Connor snapped. "He told me love would find me when I least expected it." "Well, I'm done expecting. Let fate bring her in." Outside, thunder cracked loud enough to rattle the windows. The storm that had been looming all evening finally burst, rain slashing against the glass. "This is madness," Claire muttered. Before anyone could respond, the French doors at the end of the hall flew open with a gust of wind and rain. Everyone turned. A young woman stood in the doorway, drenched. Her long blonde hair was stuck to her face and neck. She wore a soaked flannel shirt over jean shorts and muddy boots. Water dripped from her sleeves onto the polished floor. Her wide, embarrassed eyes scanned the room of formal mourners. "I'm so sorry," she gasped. "My car broke down the road. I saw lights and I just needed to get out of the storm. Maybe use a phone." No one said a word. The timing, the silence. Connor stared at her like he was witnessing fate itself. "I'll go," the girl said quickly, turning to leave. "I didn't mean to crash anything. This looks like a private wait," Connor said, barely above a whisper, then louder. "Wait." Everyone froze again, before another word was said. Mr. Alden Royce, the family lawyer, stepped forward, holding a sealed envelope. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "your grandfather left instructions. This envelope was to be opened only after his funeral and only if you made any declaration regarding marriage." Connor's drunken haze turned to dread. "This isn't a joke." Royce continued as he broke the seal and began reading. "According to Malcolm Whitmore's will, Connor Whitmore will inherit controlling shares in Whitmore Innovations and retain full authority as CEO, only if he is legally married within 6 months of this letter being read. Otherwise, those shares transfer permanently to the Malcolm Whitmore Foundation." Silence, then chaos. People erupted in whispers. Claire let out a loud gasp. Tyler swore under his breath, but Connor only stared at the woman in the doorway still, dripping on his grandfather's Persian rug, eyes now wide with both fear and realization. "No," she whispered, stepping back. "Oh no, no." She turned to flee, but Connor's voice caught her mid-step. "Please," he called out. Don't go. She paused at the threshold, rain and wind whipping around her, and slowly turned back toward him. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Connor Whitmore, who had just dared fatrialized his life, had changed forever. 3 days after the funeral, Connor stood outside a rundown brick building in Brooklyn's old industrial district, staring at the weather sign that read, S. Bennett Photography. He'd spent 2 full days pulling strings, making calls, and tracking down the mysterious woman who had stumbled into his grandfather's funeral like a scene from a dream. Her name was Sophie Bennett. She wasn't from his world. She didn't belong to country clubs, didn't attend galas, didn't sit on charity boards. She lived in a converted warehouse with newspaper taped over broken windows and paint peeling from the brick. Connor climbed the dim stairwell to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door labeled Studio 3C. Footsteps approached, and when it opened, there she was, different from the storm-soaked figure he remembered. Her blonde hair was tied in a messy bun, and she wore jeans splattered with paint and an oversized gray sweater. A camera hung from her neck. "You've got to be kidding me," she said the moment she saw him. "How did you find me?" "I'm very resourceful when I need to be," Connor replied. "May I come in?" "No." She started to close the door, but he held it open with one hand. "Just 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. Then I'll leave." Sophie hesitated, then stepped back. 5 minutes. And then you're gone. The studio was filled with emotion. Black and white photographs covered every inch of the walls. Images of elderly couples, children, single parents, immigrant families. Each frame told a story so powerful, Connor felt it in his chest. "These are amazing," he said quietly. "Don't," Sophie warned. "Don't start flattering me to butter me up. Just say whatever you came to say." Connor turned from the wall and looked her in the eyes. "I have a proposition for you." "Of course you do," she muttered. "Let me guess, you want me to pretend to be your girlfriend for some press event. Smile for the cameras, play along, then disappear. I want you to marry me." The words stopped her cold. "You're insane." "I'm serious. A legal marriage for 6 months. A business arrangement. In exchange, I'll pay you $500,000. Sophie stared at him in disbelief. "You think you can buy me?" "No. I think I can offer you a deal that solves a problem for both of us." "You mean because I live in a dump and drive a car that wheezes every time I start it?" "No, because I did my research. I know you're behind on rent. I know your grandmother's care facility costs more than you make in half a year." Her expression darkened. "You investigated me. I needed to know who I was dealing with. But what I found impressed me. Your photography, it's real. The stories you tell, the way you capture people's dignity, that's talent. With $500,000, you could fund this project. Support your grandmother properly, and build the career you deserve." She turned away, staring out the window toward the gray Brooklyn sky. "So let me get this straight," she said, slowly. "You want me to fake marry you, live in your luxury apartment, attend a few parties, and pretend we're madly in love. All for $500,000. Connor walked toward her, but stopped short of closing the distance. "Yes, we get married legally. You move in. We attend a few social events to keep up appearances, and after 6 months, we divorce, quietly, cleanly. Separate bedrooms, no expectations." Sophie turned around, searching his expression for any trace of deception. "Why me? Why not some model or influencer who already knows how to play these games? Because everyone in my world wants something. Money, connections, exposure. You didn't even know who I was when you walked in that night. You were just someone caught in the rain looking for help. And now you want to trap me in a different kind of storm. Maybe, but this one comes with an umbrella made of cash." For a second, she almost smiled. "Almost. I need time to think about it," she said, folding her arms. "I need an answer by tomorrow. The lawyers are already preparing to challenge my inheritance. Every day I wait, I lose leverage. If I say yes, I have conditions. Name them. I keep my job. I don't become your trophy wife. I continue my photography, my life, Without your interference. And when this is over, we both walk away clean, no drama, no strings. Agreed. I didn't say yes yet. Connor pulled out a black business card from his coat pocket and placed it on the nearest table. Call me when you decide. He started toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I think your work deserves to be seen by the world. This arrangement could help make that happen. When he left, Sophie stood in the middle of her studio, surrounded by portraits of people who had risked everything for a better life. On one side of her desk sat a red-stamped eviction notice. On the other, her grandmother's overdue medical bill. The next morning, she picked up the phone and called Connor Whitmore. 2 days later, in a sterile municipal office in Lower Manhattan, Connor Whitmore and Sophie Bennett stood side by side before a city judge. The ceremony was quick, under 10 minutes. The only witnesses were Tyler Hayes and Claire Whitmore, who exchanged wary glances throughout. When the judge pronounced them husband and wife, there was no kiss. Just a brief, professional handshake. Well, Sophie said, as they signed the paperwork, that was definitely the weirdest business deal I've ever made. Same here, Connor replied, handing the pen to the clerk. But I think it's going to work out for both of us. Neither of them realized how wrong they were about keeping things strictly professional. That night, Sophie stepped into the marble-tiled penthouse on Fifth Avenue that she would now temporarily call home. The ceilings stretched high, the windows framed the city skyline, and everything smelled like fresh linen and money. This is a lot, she muttered, as she dropped her backpack inside the entryway. Connor appeared from down the hall. I've had the guest suite prepped for you. You'll have your own space, your own bathroom. No one will bother you. My office is down the hall, and the kitchen's stocked with whatever you want. She followed him silently, taking in the stark modern decor, the spotless surfaces, the expensive art that meant nothing to her. It all felt like a hotel pretending to be a home. Later that evening, Connor knocked gently on her door. Sophie opened it to find him holding a small envelope. What's this? She asked. Your first installment. I wired the rest into the trust account, as agreed. She took the envelope, then hesitated. You don't have to give me this tonight. I said this was a business arrangement. I keep my word. They stood awkwardly in the hallway for a beat, before Sophie broke the silence. I'd like to convert one of the spare rooms into a dark room. I still have to work. I already asked the contractor. They'll be here next week. I told them to outfit the room to your specs. Sophie blinked. She hadn't expected him to actually listen. Thank you. Connor nodded once. Good night, Sophie. Good night, Connor. And so began their strange, carefully negotiated life together. Over the next 6 weeks, they developed a rhythm. Connor spent most days at Whitmore Innovations headquarters, managing board meetings and navigating the fallout of his grandfather's death. Sophie spent her time shooting, editing, and working in the new darkroom he'd built for her, formerly his home office. They kept to themselves, kept to the terms, and kept up appearances. Except for the coffee, every morning, like clockwork, a delivery boy from a boutique roastery showed up with 2 tall cups, one labeled with her name in neat black marker. At first, Sophie thought it was a mistake, but when it kept happening, she realized Connor had memorized her order. You didn't have to do this, she said one morning. You're living here, Connor replied simply. Can't have you drinking garbage. And so, despite all efforts to keep things transactional, little cracks began to form. Then came the fundraiser. I can't wear this, Sophie said flatly, staring at the designer black gown hanging in the walk-in closet. It looks like something you'd wear to seduce a Bond villain. It's a charity gala, not a torture chamber, Connor called from the bedroom as he adjusted his cuff. It's for the Hamptons Children's Hospital, very important cause. She stepped into the room wearing jeans and a cotton shirt. I'll write them a check, but I'm not playing dress up. Connor turned, taking in the sight of her. His face was unreadable. The agreement said you'd attend social events with me. The agreement said I'd be your wife on paper. I didn't agree to become someone I'm not. Connor exhaled through his nose. Fine, wear what you want. We're leaving in 20 minutes. An hour later, they they stepped into the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. Glittering chandeliers, champagne fountains, string quartets, and dresses that cost more than rent in most boroughs filled the room. Sophie, in jeans and a blouse, drew stares, like a fire in the middle of winter. Connor, darling. A well-dressed woman in her 50s swept up to them, her diamonds practically glowing. And this must be the mysterious bride we've heard so much about. Mrs. Whitmore, Connor said smoothly, placing a hand on Sophie's lower back. Meet my wife, Sophie. How charming, the woman replied, eyeing her outfit. And what is it that you do, dear? I'm a photographer. Oh, weddings and such. Documentary. Immigrant communities. Families on the margins. Mrs. Whitmore's expression twitched slightly. How socially aware. As the evening dragged on, Sophie grew increasingly irritated. Every conversation focused on her background, her credentials or her lack of them. The donors and debutantes weren't interested in her work. They were interested in the scandal. Finally, during the silent auction, Sophie stood up from the table. I'd like to say something. Connor looked up sharply. Sophie, maybe not here, but she was already walking to the stage. The auctioneer stopped. The room fell still. Hi, I'm Sophie Bennett. Some of you know me as Connor Whitmore's wife, which seems to be the only thing anyone here finds worth discussing. But I'm also a photojournalist. And I want to tell you about the family I photographed last month. She told them about the Morales family and documented immigrants from El Salvador. Both parents working brutal hours, scraping together $5 a month for the local food bank. They give when they have almost nothing to give, she said, her voice steady. That's real charity, not writing checks at cocktail parties. She placed the microphone down and walked back to the table. The room was silent. Connor stood slowly. We should leave. Yes, Sophie replied. We should. They left without another word in the car. Connor didn't speak. Sophie waited for the scolding, the lecture. The guilt, it never came. When they got home, he poured 2 glasses of wine and handed her one. That was either the most courageous thing I've ever seen, he said finally, or the most reckless. Probably both. They sat on opposite ends of the couch. Tell me about the Morales family, he said. I want to know their story. For the next hour, Sophie talked. About her work. About the people she'd photographed. About the lives most of the world chose not to see. And Connor Whitmore listened like it was the most important story he'd ever heard. The following Saturday, Connor did something unexpected. He accompanied Sophie to Queens for a scheduled photo shoot with the Ruiz family, a Mexican-American household she'd documented several times. Dressed in worn jeans and a gray sweater instead of his usual tailored suits, Connor looked like a different man altogether. Mr. Connor, Lily Ruiz squealed as she ran up to greet them. Are you Sophie's boyfriend? He's my husband, Sophie replied, the words still foreign in her mouth. Ooh, so do you love each other? Lily giggled, her curiosity unfiltered. Sophie and Connor exchanged a glance. It's complicated, Sophie said with a smile. That didn't quite reach her eyes. Connor spent the afternoon chasing soccer balls with the kids in the small backyard while Sophie snapped pictures. He laughed without restraint, even when he slipped and landed in a pile of leaves. Inside, he helped Mrs. Ruiz wash dishes and asked questions about her family's journey to the US. He's not what I expected, Mrs. Ruiz said to Sophie, in Spanish as they observed him from the kitchen window. He's not what I expected either, Sophie replied, a quiet truth lingering behind her voice. That evening, back at the penthouse, they sat on the couch editing photos together. Connor leaned forward intently, studying the images as Sophie explained the story behind each one. They were closer than usual, shoulders brushing. Warmth shared in a way neither acknowledged. This one, Connor said, pointing at a shot of Mr. Ruiz tying his son's shoelaces. There's something about it. It's simple, but powerful. Have a good eye, Sophie said, watching him. I have a good teacher. She turned slightly. The way his hair fell across his forehead, the way he was genuinely interested, it all blurred the line between fake and real. Her heart began to race. Connor, she said softly. He looked at her, his gaze meeting hers. For a second, their faces drew closer. His eyes dropped to her lips. Sophie leaned in, almost without thinking. But then Connor's phone buzzed. He pulled away, sitting back stiffly. I should check on some work emails, right? Of course, she said, already pulling her laptop back into focus. He left the room without another word. Sophie stared at the screen, but her thoughts were far from photography. The rules were supposed to be clear business only. No feelings, but what happened on that couch hadn't felt like business at all. And she wasn't the only one who felt it. In his home office, Connor sat at his desk, staring blankly at his inbox. All he could think about was the moment he almost kissed her. The closeness, the spark, the part of him he'd tried to shut away for years was fighting to surface. He was in trouble. Because the problem wasn't that Sophie was making their arrangement complicated. The problem was that he didn't want it to be an arrangement anymore. You don't have to come with me to every shoot, Sophie said, the next week, as Connor grabbed his jacket. Seriously, I like coming, Connor replied. Besides, Mrs. Chang always asks about you when I don't show up. It was true. Over the past month, he had become a fixture in the communities Sophie worked in. He'd learned names, helped fix broken fences, donated computers to local youth centers, and even picked up a few Spanish phrases from the kids. You've changed, Sophie said as they boarded the subway to Queens. Connor raised an eyebrow. Thanks. I mean it. 4 months ago, you were closed off, cold. Now you laugh at Lily's terrible knock-knock jokes. Maybe I just needed someone to show me what I was missing. Their eyes met. Sophie felt the familiar flutter in her chest, the one she had been trying to ignore. Connor, she began. But the train pulled into their stop before she could finish. That day, they visited the Patel family. While Sophie set up her gear, Connor helped in the kitchen and entertained the children. Watching him so naturally bond with everyone made something in Sophie's chest ache. She was falling for her fake husband. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't part of the plan. They had rules, boundaries, an end date, but somewhere between social events and backyard soccer games, Connor Whitmore had stopped being just a temporary partner. He was becoming something real. Are you okay? He asked, noticing her distraction. I'm fine, she said quickly, avoiding his eyes. That night, they attended another gala fest, one for public school scholarships. Sophie had grown more comfortable at these events, but still refused to wear anything from Connor's stylist. During a quiet moment, she excused herself to find the restroom. On her way back, she passed a secluded alcove where 2 women stood whispering. I still can't believe Connor Whitmore married that little nobody, said one. Sophie froze. She recognized the voice. It was Victoria Langdon, a rival businesswoman, who always hovered near Connor at every function. It won't last, said the other. I heard from someone inside Whitmore Innovations that the whole thing's fake. Just an inheritance scam. Sophie's heart dropped. Deliciously scandalous, Victoria continued. She probably threw herself at him right after the funeral. Gold digger, plain and simple. I've already been leaking stories to the press. If I can prove the marriage is fraudulent, I might just tank his stock and force a board vote. Sophie backed away slowly, panic rising in her chest. Victoria wasn't just gossiping, she was orchestrating a calculated attack to destroy Connor's reputation and company. Sophie found Connor by the bar, mid-conversation with Tyler. To leave, she said, quietly at his side. Connor took one look at her face and nodded without asking a single question. In the car, she told him everything. Every word she overheard, every threat Victoria had made. His jaw clenched with each sentence. She's been circling for months, Connor said finally. She's wanted control of Whitmore Innovations ever since Grandad passed. I'm sorry, Sophie said. This is all my fault. If I hadn't walked into that room, don't. His voice cut through. This isn't your fault. She would have found another way. Back at the penthouse, they sat in silence. Sophie stared at the floor, twisting her hands in her lap. Maybe we should end this now, she said. Divorce, before it gets worse. No, Connor said instantly, his voice low and sharp. I won't let her win. But if the press finds out the truth about us, then we make sure they don't. Sophie looked at him, this man who had started as a stranger. Then, a business partner. Now something she didn't have a name for. Connor, she whispered. I need to tell you something. He turned to face her. This arrangement, it stopped being just business for me. A while ago. I know it wasn't part of the deal, but I can't pretend anymore. She met his eyes and finished the thought. I'm in love with you. The silence after Sophie's confession stretched long enough to hurt. Connor stared at her, his expression unreadable. Every second he didn't speak chipped away at her courage. Finally, he exhaled and said, Sophie, you're confused. She flinched like she'd been slapped. This situation, living together, playing house it, messes with your head. But it's not real, we're not real. Her voice trembled, but she stood her ground. Don't tell me what I'm feeling. You think you love me, Connor continued, pacing now. But what you love is the idea of me. The version of me you see when I'm playing my part. That's not true, it has to be true. His tone sharpened. Because if it's not, then we've both broken the one rule that was supposed to keep this simple. Sophie stood up. Her voice was quiet but firm. Maybe simple was never going to work. Simple is all we have, Connor shot back. In 2 months, this ends. You get your money. I keep my company, we move on. That's the deal we made. Tears burned behind Sophie's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She walked toward her bedroom and paused in the doorway without looking back. For what it's worth, she said, the man I fell in love with wouldn't be so afraid of taking a real risk. She disappeared into the room, leaving Connor alone in the silence of his gleaming, lifeless penthouse. He stared at the photographs on the wall, her work, her vision, her voice. Pictures of families who had risked everything for love, hope, and a better future. He thought about calling after her, telling her she wasn't alone in how she felt. That he'd been lying to, that he'd fallen for her, just as hard. But fear held him in place. Fear of vulnerability, fear of pain, fear of losing control. Instead, he poured himself a drink and tried to convince himself that sticking to the plan was the smart thing. By morning, Sophie was gone. She left a note on the kitchen counter, neatly folded. No mention of love, no mention of regret. Just polite professionalism. She'd accepted a 6-week photography assignment documenting climate change impacts in Alaska. Connor read the note 3 times before he crumpled it and tossed it into the sink. The penthouse was suddenly too quiet. Cold to empty. He wandered through the space like a stranger. The dark room still smelled faintly of chemicals. Her coffee mug still sat in the dishwasher. A scarf she'd forgotten hung over the back of the couch. It had been 3 weeks, and Connor Whitmore was slowly losing his mind. You look awful, Claire said one afternoon, finding him staring out the window. She'd made a habit of checking in on him ever since Sophie left. I'm fine, Connor replied, his voice hollow. You're not fine, you're miserable, and you're too proud to admit it. He turned back to the skyline. She left to work on something important. That's what she wanted. No, Claire said sharply. She left because you broke her heart, and she didn't know what else to do. I was protecting us from a mistake. Claire sat down beside him and folded her arms. Do you remember what you told me when Mum and Dad died? When I was scared to leave the house because I thought something terrible would happen? Connor didn't respond. You told me that hiding from life wasn't living. That being afraid to lose something was no excuse not to try. He closed his eyes, remembering, and when I was too scared to leave for college, I drove you there, he muttered. You forced me to take the risk because you knew I'd regret it forever if I didn't. So why won't you take your own advice? He was quiet for a long time because losing Mum and Dad nearly destroyed us, he said at last. And if I let myself fall for someone again, really fall, I don't know if I could survive that kind of pain. Claire leaned in, her voice gentle. Sophie isn't going to disappear in a plane crash. She's just going to move on with her life. Without you. While you sit here trying to convince yourself you're better off alone. That evening, Connor found himself walking through Queens with no plan and no destination. He passed the community center where he and Sophie had spent so many afternoons. Without even thinking, he knocked on the Ruiz family's door. "Mr. Connor," Lily shrieked, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Where's Sophie? We haven't seen her in forever." "She's working," he said, kneeling to return her hug. On an important project, Mrs. Ruiz stepped into the doorway, her face lighting up. "Come in, we're just finishing dinner." An hour later, Connor sat at their kitchen table, laughing with the kids and listening to Mr. Ruiz tell the story of how he met his wife back in Guadalajara. "I was terrified to tell her how I felt," the older man said, smiling at his wife. "She was so smart, so beautiful. I thought, what could she want with a poor guy like me?" "What changed your mind?" Connor asked. "My grandfather," Mr. Ruiz replied. "He told me something I never forgot. He said, you can spend your whole life protecting yourself from getting hurt, or you can spend it building something beautiful. But you can't do both." Mrs. Ruiz reached across the table and squeezed her husband's hand. 32 years later, I'm still glad he took the risk. As Connor helped clear the table, Mrs. Ruiz pulled him aside. "You miss her?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "Then why are you here?" she asked gently. Instead of with her, Connor had no good answer. That night, he met Tyler at a quiet bar downtown without reporters, board members, or expectations. "I need to tell you something," Tyler said, once their drinks arrived. "I've been in love with Claire for 3 years. Connor nearly choked on his whiskey. "What?" "I know. She's your sister. I'm your best friend, and it's a mess, but I can't pretend anymore." Connor stared at him, watching you and Sophie before you blew it. Watching how happy you were, it made me realize I'm tired of being afraid. "If you hurt her, I won't," Tyler said. "That's the point. I love her too much to hurt her." He paused, looking Connor dead in the eye. "The question is, do you love Sophie enough to stop hurting her?" Connor looked away. "I don't know how to do this. I've spent years keeping people at a distance." Tyler shrugged. "Then maybe it's time to learn." The next morning, Connor made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Instead of going into the office, he spent the entire day walking across Queens, visiting every family Sophie had photographed. He talked with the Morales family about their daughter's college dreams. He helped Mr. Rodriguez fix his broken gate. He sat with Mrs. Chang as she told him stories about her grandchildren. Each conversation showed him what Sophie had seen, all along, ordinary people doing extraordinary things, bound by love, by sacrifice, by hope. By the time he returned to Manhattan that night, he finally understood what he had to do. That evening, Connor called the Whitmore Foundation's board office and set a plan in motion. "I need to schedule a photography exhibition," he told the director, "featuring the work of Sophie Bennett. But sir, there's nothing on the calendar. Make space. I want every photograph she's taken displayed. Every family she's documented. I want it professionally mounted, perfectly lit, and ready in 2 weeks. No delays, no budget caps." The director hesitated. "That's nearly impossible. The permits alone then make it possible," Connor interrupted. "Call in favors, hire whoever you need. I'll cover every expense, and make sure the press is there. I want every art blog, every magazine, every photography critic talking about Sophie Bennett's work." His assistant looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. "Sir, is this personal?" "It's about telling the truth," Connor replied, "and showing the world what real value looks like." The next morning, he sent a message to Sophie's emergency contact, her friend and gallery assistant, requesting that Sophie return to New York immediately. The reason? An urgent matter related to her career. At that same moment, miles away, Sophie stood in a windswept Alaskan village, staring at the message on her cracked phone screen. Her heart pounded. An exhibition. She hadn't arranged any. Confused and breathless, with a spark of hope, she booked the first flight back to New York. 2 days later, Sophie stood on the steps of the Whitmore Foundation Gallery in Chelsea, stunned. A massive white banner hung above the entrance with elegant black lettering. Invisible Stories. A photography exhibition by Sophie Bennett. Beneath the title were excerpts from press releases, glowing praise from critics, and even a quote from the mayor. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door, but before she could push it open, it swung toward her. Sophie. Tyler appeared, dressed in a sharp grey suit, but looking slightly frazzled. Thank God you're here. Connor's been going crazy trying to reach you. What is this? I didn't plan an exhibition. Connor did. He's been working on it for 2 straight weeks, called in every favor he had. Flew in families from all over the country. Sophie blinked. What? Before Tyler could answer, Claire joined them, practically glowing with excitement. You look amazing. Very rugged. National Geographic chic. He's inside, having a complete meltdown, by the way. He's convinced you're going to hate everything. Sophie walked inside and gasped. The gallery was filled with her photographs, every portrait professionally framed, thoughtfully arranged. Each image had its own placard, featuring quotes from the subjects and insights about their stories. The Morales family, Mr. Rodriguez, the Patels, the Ruiz children, faces she'd captured with care, now honored with respect. But that wasn't all. The families themselves were there, dressed in their best clothes. They stood proudly beside their photos, smiling as guests admired the stories that had once gone unseen. Sophie. Lily Ruiz ran toward her in a beautiful pink dress. Look, we're famous. Sophie knelt, pulling the girl into a hug. You look perfect, you all do. He said tonight is about us, Lily whispered, about showing people our stories matter. Sophie looked up slowly, scanning the gallery until her eyes landed on him. Connor stood near the far wall, wearing a simple black suit. His hands clasped in front of him, his hair slightly tousled like he'd been running his fingers through it all night. Their eyes met. Sophie walked toward him. I don't understand, she said. Connor's voice was quiet, steady. I did this because your work deserves to be seen, because these families deserve to be celebrated, because you've spent your life telling the stories no one else wants to tell. He glanced around the gallery, then back at her. But more than anything, I did it because I finally understand what real wealth looks like. Before Sophie could respond, the gallery director stepped onto the small stage at the center of the room and took the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention? We'd like to invite the artist, Sophie Bennett, to say a few words. Sophie's eyes widened. She shook her head. I can't. I didn't prepare anything. You don't need to, Connor said, gently touching her arm. Just tell them why these stories matter. Trembling, Sophie stepped onto the platform and took the mic. The room quieted. 6 months ago, I was behind on rent, barely able to afford groceries. Trying to finish a photo series about immigrant families, she began. I was documenting their challenges, their strength, their dignity, but I was angry. Angry at how invisible they were in this city. She paused, looking at the families now, smiling back at her. But someone recently reminded me that anger without action is just noise. These families didn't need my anger. They needed their voices heard. They needed to be seen for who they are: resilient, brave, real. She looked at the audience. Art isn't about pretty pictures, it's about truth, about helping us see the humanity in each other. The applause was thunderous. Gallery owners offered exhibition deals, magazine editors asked for interviews, critics congratulated her with handshakes and admiration. But Sophie only looked for one face in the room. Connor. As the crowd thinned and the music faded, they found themselves alone in the center of the gallery, surrounded by her life's work. I need to ask you something, she said, her voice low. Did you do all of this to help my career, or were you trying to buy my forgiveness? Connor stepped closer. I did it because I realized I've been an idiot. She stared at him. You told me you loved me, and instead of being grateful, I got scared and ran. I've spent my whole adult life controlling everything. I thought it protected me. But I finally figured it out. None of it means anything without you. He dropped to one knee, right there, in the center of a gallery filled with portraits of hope, family, and second chances. He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Inside was a simple, elegant ring, no diamonds, no spectacle, just love. Sophie Bennett, he said, I'm asking you to marry me. Not for inheritance, not for appearances, but because you are the most honest, brave, passionate person I've ever known. You showed me what it means to see, to care, to love. Tears welled in her eyes. Is this real? This is real. I love you, all of you, your stubbornness, your awful coffee, the way you fight for things that matter. Sophie laughed through her tears. Yes, she whispered. Of course, yes. Connor stood and slipped the ring on her finger. And in that moment, they both knew what began as an impossible agreement had become the most authentic love story either of them could have imagined. 3 months later, Sophie and Connor stood in the middle of the Queen's community garden, where it had all started. The sky was clear. String lights swayed gently above the tables. Flowers bloomed along the wooden fences. The scent of fresh bread, homemade tamales, and lavender filled the air. They were getting married again, but this time, it was real. The family Sophie had photographed surrounded them, dressed in celebration. Lily Ruiz was the flower girl, dropping petals with dramatic flair. Mrs. Chang had baked a stunning 3-tiered cake. The Morales family provided the music. Carlos strummed a guitar while Maria sang softly in Spanish. Tyler stood beside Connor, straightening his tie nervously. Claire stood beside Sophie, holding her bouquet with pride and emotion. When the official asked if the couple had written their own vows, Connor turned to Sophie with steady eyes. I promise to never stop taking risks for love, he said. Sophie smiled, her eyes glistening. And I promise to never stop showing you what's possible when you do. Their kiss was met with cheers that echoed through the neighborhood. Children danced. Neighbors peeked through fences. It was raw, joyful, and completely unfiltered. No black tie ballroom, no photographers from Vanity Fair, just truth, laughter, and the people who had shaped their journey. In the weeks that followed, Sophie and Connor returned to their now shared life in the penthouse. But the place didn't look the same anymore. Gone were the sterile gray couches and empty white walls. In their place were warm tones, messy bookshelves, a coffee table scattered with camera lenses, and walls covered with framed photographs from Guatemala, India, Italy, and the Bronx. Connor sat at the kitchen island one morning, reviewing proof copies of Sophie's newest photography book. Her project had taken her around the world to document the everyday beauty of families raising children in difficult circumstances. Sophie stood at the stove making tea, the sunlight casting a glow through the windows and across her figure. There was something different about her posture, something softer, quieter, grounded. The publisher loves it, Connor said, flipping a page. They want to do a 12-city tour. That's great, Sophie replied, not turning around. You don't sound excited. I am, she said, finally turning to face him, holding her mug with both hands. I'm just also pregnant. Connor froze. For a moment, he didn't move, didn't blink, then he stood up so fast his chair screeched against the floor. Are you serious? Sophie nodded, smiling. Dead serious, I found out yesterday. I didn't know how to tell you. He crossed the kitchen in 3 strides, swept her into his arms, and spun her in a circle. This is incredible. This is amazing. This is also terrifying, she laughed. Perfect, he whispered, setting her down gently and resting his hands on her stomach. This is perfect. Just then, the front door opened. Claire and Tyler entered, carrying coffee and croissants. Good morning, lovebirds, Claire sang. We brought pastries and why are you smiling like that? Sophie exchanged a look with Connor. Claire's eyes widened. No. Sophie nodded. About 8 weeks, Claire shrieked and hugged her carefully. Tyler slapped Connor's back so hard it made the dishes clink. This is the best news, Claire said, tears in her eyes. Mum and Dad would have been so proud, and they would have absolutely adored you, Sophie. Connor swallowed hard. They would have made amazing grandparents. And speaking of grandparents, Tyler said, glancing at Claire, we have a little announcement too. Claire held up her hand, revealing a beautiful antique engagement ring. Tyler beamed. She finally said yes. I've been carrying that ring for 6 months, he added, waiting for the right moment. Claire nudged him playfully. The right moment was 6 months ago. The rest of the morning was spent planning a double celebration, teasing each other about baby names, and laughing more than they had in years. Later that afternoon, Connor found Sophie in the dark room. What was once a sleek, unused dining room had been transformed into her creative sanctuary. She was developing prints for her next series, portraits of expectant parents from different cultures, captured in moments of quiet joy. Working on the new book already? He asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. I want to document this entire experience, she said. Pregnancy, birth, parenthood, but through the lens of families who never get their stories told. Like us, she turned, facing him. Well, maybe not financially, but a former street photographer and a reformed, emotionally unavailable CEO who fell in love during a fake marriage. That's a pretty rare demographic. Connor laughed. Is that how you see our story? I see it as proof that the best things happen when you let go of control and take the risk. Very philosophical, he said. For a photographer, I learned from the best, she replied. They stood together in the glow of red lights, surrounded by prints still dripping in solution, raw moments captured forever. I have something for you, Connor said, pulling a small box from his pocket. Connor, you don't need to keep buying me things. It's not expensive, just open it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm shaped like a camera. On the back, it was engraved. For the woman who taught me to see. Sophie blinked back tears. I love it. Pregnancy hormones, he teased. Shut up, she said, smiling. I love you. I love you more, he replied, fastening it gently around her wrist. Both of you. As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden light through the windows, Connor Whitmore looked around the home they'd built together. 2 years ago, he believed love was dangerous. That control was safety. That feelings could cost him everything. Now, he knew the truth. Love was the only thing that had ever made him feel alive. The money, the suits, the board meetings, all of it, meant nothing compared to waking up next to the woman who challenged him, believed in him, and made him want to be better every single day. And they were just getting started. 2 years had passed since Connor Whitmore stood in a crowded room and made a drunken, defiant promise to marry the first woman who walked through the door. He had no idea that promise would lead him to the greatest love of his life. Now, their penthouse looked nothing like the cold, curated space it once was. Gone were the chrome fixtures and minimalist art. In their place were photographs from around the world, vibrant families in rural Guatemala, elderly couples in small Italian villages, children laughing in the streets of Mumbai. Every image was part of Sophie's global series on love and family, a body of work that had earned her international acclaim. The one silent penthouse now echoed with life. Wooden toys rolled across Persian rugs. A portable bassinet sat beside the sofa. And the kitchen counter was cluttered with formula bottles, pacifiers, and open notebooks full of Sophie's next photo series. Connor sat at the table, holding their 6-month-old son Noah, as he reviewed the final proof pages for Sophie's upcoming book. Sophie moved through the kitchen behind him, making tea with one hand while replying to messages on her phone with the other. You know, he said, bouncing Noah gently, the publisher's talking about expanding your launch tour to London and Berlin. That's amazing, she said, smiling without looking up. Though I'm more focused on finding 5 minutes of sleep. He stood, kissed her cheek, and passed Noah back to her arms. We'll get through it. We already are, Sophie replied, shifting the baby to her hip. As she walked into the nursery to lay Noah down, Connor followed and paused in the doorway. Photos covered the walls. Sophie had turned the nursery into a storybook in pictures, every image a moment from their journey. Their wedding, the gallery exhibition, a shot of Claire and Tyler's own wedding, and another of Sophie holding Noah. For the first time, Connor looked around the room and felt something settle in his chest. Peace, gratitude, wonder. He found Sophie again in the dark room, her latest prints soaking. She was developing a new series, portraits of first-time parents from unexpected journeys. Families who, like them, never saw love coming. Still working? He asked. I want to get this last one ready for the feature spread. Connor studied the print in her hand. It was a photo of them, him holding Noah, her leaning on his shoulder, both smiling but clearly exhausted. We don't usually belong in your gallery, he said quietly. Sophie turned to him. No one ever belongs in the beginning. They just end up being part of the story. He reached for her hand and pressed something into her palm. Another gift, simple, small dot. It was a key. What's this? To the cabin in Vermont. The one we stayed at during the photo shoot last fall. Her eyes widened. You bought it. I did. I figured we could use a quiet place to disappear when the city gets loud. And when Noah gets old enough to run wild. She slipped her arms around his waist. You're a romantic now. No, Connor said with a grin. I'm just a man who finally figured out what matters. They stood together in the soft red light of the dark room, the smell of chemicals, coffee, and baby lotion mixing in the air. Sophie rested her head on his chest, her fingers grazing the camera charm on the bracelet he'd given her. I used to think the best stories were the ones you planned, she said softly. The ones with a clear arc, a neat ending. They're not, he asked. No, the best ones surprise you. They break your rules. They start with something ridiculous like a man making a drunken promise at a funeral, and they grow into something real. Connor smiled, pulling her closer. Our story didn't make sense on paper. It still doesn't. And yet, she said, it's the most real thing I've ever known. As evening fell across Manhattan, they walked into the nursery to check on Noah. He was sound asleep, his tiny hand curled around the corner of a blanket. Sophie leaned into Connor's side. So, she whispered, what do we do next? Whatever we want, he said. Write new chapters, build new dreams, take new risks. Together, always. And in that quiet, perfect moment, surrounded by the unexpected life they'd built, Connor knew the truth. Some love stories begin with champagne, toasts, and candlelit dinners. Others begin with storms, sealed letters, and impossible promises. But the best ones, the ones that last, begin when two people stop pretending and choose, every day, to build something real.